Hello and welcome to the December edition of Coffee with the Pastors. I'm Pastor Daniel Hanson and joined today by Pastor Dan Dahl, Pastor Dan Gerrietts. We've got our favorite warm beverages gathered here today. We invite you to grab a cup of coffee, tea, water, whatever it is you enjoy, and join us for a conversation about faith and life here at Trinity Lutheran. Happy Advent. Christmas is almost here.
Yes, indeed.
I've been following my Advent calendar, which was always a big deal growing up. And according to my Advent calendar, it's only 7 more days until Christmas Eve. So as we got a little bit of snow earlier this week, it kind of feels like Christmas Eve, which is kind of nice to get ready in that way for the spirit of things.
But I think pastors in particular are really attuned to where Christmas Eve falls in the week, right? Because of preaching and worship duties, the years when Christmas Eve is like the day before, the day after a Sunday, that creates some interesting weekends. And this is one of those rare years where Christmas Eve falls on the weekend, right? So like we don't have 4 days in a row of worship, we just have 2, but one of them, Christmas Day, falls on Sunday. And that varies. That's interesting. So you get this long week, right, that we have before us before we get to Christmas, even though this weekend is the 4th Sunday weekend in Advent. That's for the liturgical nerds out there.
Right. I mean, Easter's April 8th. I can already tell you that. Like, you just know, right? You just know these things innately. But well, Christmas Eve is only a week away. So maybe, Pastor Dan, you could share a little bit about some opportunities to worship here at Trinity for Christmas Eve. And maybe share with folks, if you haven't been here for Christmas Eve before, what can you expect at the different worship services that are available?
Absolutely. So we have 4 services on Christmas Eve. There's a 1:30, a 4 o'clock, a 5:30, and a 10:30 with an extended musical prelude. So it really kind of starts at 10, but the actual invocation or beginning of the service is at 10:30. So a full day, lots of different options. I think the 1:30 and the 10:30 are similar traditional hymns, traditional kind of sermon. They both have communion. The only difference really between 1:30 and 10:30 is that we light candles at 10:30 and pass them. So the 10:30 is our candlelight service. But other than that, those 2 services are very similar on the bookends of the day. The middle 2 services are really geared to be more toward, to be more family friendly, to be more friendly for children in particular. There's a children's sermon at both of them. The message is generally a little bit friendlier for if you've got little ones you want to bring with you to church. And the time is such that hopefully you can attend that service and still have dinner with your family, open presents, those kinds of things. The main difference between the 4 o'clock and the 5:30 is that we celebrate communion at 5:30, but we do not at 4 o'clock, which makes 4 o'clock a little bit shorter as well. So 1:30, 4 o'clock, 5:30, 10:30 are the times. And they all have traditionally been well attended, not overly packed so that there's not seats, but a nice turnout at all 4 of them, and great music. We sing the carols, we read the story, all of those things that are important, I think, to all of us on Christmas Eve. So, and all traditional, I should say. All of them are traditional music and traditional liturgy.
Well, I know for many, Christmas Eve is the service that they might look forward to most throughout the year, in part because of those Christmas songs, and in part maybe because the sanctuary is beautiful, is decorated in such a beautiful way with the lights and different things like that. I thought we could spend a little bit of time talking about what's especially meaningful for us as we gather for worship on Christmas Eve. Maybe that's a story from an experience that you had in the past that was really unique. Maybe it's a tradition that you've done every single year as long as you can remember. But I thought that might be a fun conversation to share a little bit. What's especially meaningful to you about worshiping on Christmas Eve, either here at Trinity or somewhere else?
Well, go ahead. Before we hop into it, I should say, though, that we have a Christmas Day service too.
Yes.
And that is on Sunday, which is Christmas Day, and that's at 9 o'clock. So before we jump into the Christmas Day, I thought, I left that off. I really shouldn't have done that. So yeah, we do have a Christmas Day service too. But go ahead, Pastor Dahl, you talk about,
All right. Well, having been at Trinity in the 50s and 60s, we always were here at the church, and just it was beautiful and awe-inspiring. I just felt at peace. When I was 12, 13, 14 years old, I would acolyte at one or two of these services and had a special seat up there. So that was kind of nice too. And I really enjoyed that. Then we go home and Dad would always read the full Christmas story. And then there was presents, but we always would come to, that was really the meaningful part of Christmas Eve for me growing up. And then later on, I'll just share a couple stories from the Trinity Lutheran. And again, this is not from the archives. This is from my own special stock of Trinity Lutherans. And so I was able to find this in the box. I'll share one from January 28th, 1982, and then one from 1984. And there is a connection, as you'll see. But we had just went down to Brazil, and I started as pastor of 7 congregations, 7 points, in August of 1981. So this letter was sent to Trinity by snail mail. I wrote it December 29th, 1981, and it was printed in the Trinity Lutheran here. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but I'll just read kind of the final. So again, I've been 5 months there. And in the meantime, our daughter was born. I flew up to Sao Paulo for that and back. So I started, on my own. Then Denise flew down when our daughter was 15 days old. And so she was already, there with me right away almost. And so I said, "Dear friends in Christ." So they would print the whole letter. Sometimes I would handwrite it and they'd photocopy that and stick it in the Trinity Lutheran. But as you're in the midst of winter, cold, and snow, we're in the midst of summer heat and rain, and I write about our location. In the next paragraph, once I arrived, this is 5 months ago in the letter, I became actively involved in the duties of being pastor. I buried, married, confirmed, baptized, preached, taught, and most importantly, visited many members. So I just hit the road running, when I got there. And then the next third paragraph was talking about an ecumenical wedding I was involved with, planning with a priest in the area. But to get to the conference, I needed to take 2 ferry boats. There weren't any bridges or 2 huge winding rivers between the main city, which is the size of Mason City, and this other community. And on the way, there'd usually be a flat tire, quite common in those days. Even though this other town was only 30 miles away, I spent 1.5 hours getting there and 2 hours getting back. And I've learned to leave quite early. So in other words, as I was planning, this is on the 29th of December, I'd already done all the Christmas Eve services and Christmas Day services at these 7 places, because they all went in the same day. The other services I could spread out, but so I'd done that previous weekend with all these going over the rivers and all that stuff. So this is the last paragraph. This is in one of the congregations. Services are held at one of my preaching points in the house of a poor couple who have 6 children. And the following incident took place just before the Christmas service on Christmas Day. Again, I'm reading out of the Trinity Lutheran. And as I entered the living room where the wooden benches and altar are placed, I was met by the father, the owner of this house. We exchanged our greetings to one another and began to converse, and I asked him how everything was going. He responded, "Rotten." And we were speaking in Portuguese and continued, "Everything is rotten." I asked him why he felt this way. He said, "I've had a hard week. It seemed like my whole body's in pain. Look at my foot, how swollen it is." A tractor backed over it. "My kids, I can't give them much for Christmas. We're a poor family. We don't have much, as you can see. I work so hard and earn so little, and it doesn't seem worth it." And then he changed his tone of voice as tears filled his eyes, thinking about what he just said, but joy, really. And he said in affirmation, "But everything is good. My kids have their health. We have food to eat, a house to live in. My kids are getting the education they deserve, and it's Christmas. Jesus came for people like me. He was poor like me. What more could I want? Let's celebrate Christmas, Pastor. And we did just that. That was out of the January 28th. And this is 1982. And this congregation, we had other members in that place who had more needs, but they wanted to worship with this man in this house. And that was just wonderful. I remember that to this day. And then I had a guitar in those days, and we played all kinds of carols. It was just incredible. And this is just to follow up. This is the Trinity Lutheran from January 5th, 1984. So we spent 3 years there. Missionaries generally did, and then 3 months back in the States here to visit all the sponsoring churches I had in Minnesota, South Dakota, and so on. So this is the January 5th, 1984. Here's the Dan Dahls. And so, so I was in town for those 3 months. Dan will preach at all services, so I did that. And but the thing is, I was looking at it, and I'll just share this with you, which you might think is interesting. Here it is. So I'm not making it up. Old winter hit us. It probably is not necessary nor appreciated to remind you of the Christmas weather. It was, as so many have said, a Christmas not to be forgotten. Never before have we had to cancel Christmas Eve services. And I was so much looking forward to that. We were in town, had to come up from Brazil for 3 months, looking forward to these Christmas Eve services, but they were canceled. The makeup on Christmas Day helped, but it was not the same. As you can well understand, now here comes, different minds coming in the next paragraph. The offerings were likewise affected. So this is a reminder or an appeal, in parentheses, to underline this part, to please bring your special Christmas offering to church on Sunday, as well as the regular Sunday offering. We have come to depend on these generous gifts at the end of the year. The books will be held open, so those who wish to complete their 1983 pledge may do so. Thank you for your concern and dedication. So I thought that was interesting because the Christmas Eves that I grew up with, they were canceled that year when we were in the States. But I preached then in early January, and that was a lot of fun at all the services. And had a chance to be at the men's breakfast and talk about Brazil and with the women and the Bible study and show slides in those days. So that was a lot of fun, very memorable.
I'm always reminded that it's not always winter for people during Christmas, right? Here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's always, in the meek, bleak midwinter. Yeah, to think about
Yes.
that. Yeah, right. That's not the true in Brazil. It's hot and sunny and rainy.
Hot, sunny, and if you go there, though, all the shopping centers are more Christmassy than you could ever imagine. Just really, really decorated. So we still celebrate, the church here as everyone else does in Brazil.
Well, what a powerful story to have too of a very different experience of Christmas Eve in a home with someone as they wrestled with different things to say.
Right.
I know I look forward to Christmas Eve every year, in the beautifully decorated sanctuary because I love Christmas decorations, but it probably felt a little different to experience, probably a little closer to what it was actually like for Mary and Joseph to welcome Jesus into the world.
Yeah, I did. I'll always remember it. Of all the places I've been, I was just beginning out too in my ministry, and it affected me the rest until today. Yeah.
Well, Pastor Dan, how about for you? What memories of Christmas Eve, or what's especially meaningful for you as you get ready for worship this year?
There was actually my last Christmas Eve in my first congregation. We also had to cancel services. That was an open country parish, but it snowed a bunch on Christmas Eve. And so we had to call off. It was a big deal in that country church. It was a good sized country church. And that was the Christmas program that night. So there'd be 250, 300 people that would come to Christmas Eve, and the kids would do their thing. And it was really sad to not have that program, but two, for us, our last Christmas there, we were going to be leaving to come here actually in January. And so that was sad, but I remember that our girls were very young. They had their little parts for the program, and we dressed them up and we plowed our way through the snow across the yard over, because we were in a parsonage right next to the church. And And we went over and we turned on all of the lights in the sanctuary, and we turned on the Christmas tree up front, and the girls got up and they did their little parts for Molly and me, and I think our folks were with us, and that was it. That was our Christmas Eve service, and that's one that I'll never forget because of both the age of our girls, but also just the kind of the specialness of that circumstance. Here at Trinity, though, some of my favorite memories, I think back to my first handful of years here at Trinity. John Fritz had resumed doing his altar sculptures out of styrofoam. And I remember when I first heard that we had this artist who did sculptures out of styrofoam, I thought, well, that could be really interesting, like in the Minnesota sense of interesting, right? But then I saw the first one, and they were these remarkable works of art, where he had sculpted huge pieces of styrofoam into a scene from the Nativity, and they were different every year. Sometimes they had words and notes. So I think that first year it was Mary, this kind of angelic looking Mary holding out this baby to the congregation in 3D, and it was flocked with like tree flocking. And with lighting very carefully, just this incredible thing that John would just do from scratch. And he had done this years ago at Trinity and then stopped for a little while, but then resumed about the time that I joined staff 10, 12 years ago. And so those are great memories. But just for me, all of the worship on Christmas Eve it's so special. From the little ones in the earlier services in the day to the candlelight service and the beautiful music, the choir and stuff in the evening. Those are all just really great memories of Christmas Eve here.
Pastor Dahl just shared with me that there was a book that had those altar pieces and the front of the different years. And I was actually looking at just yesterday, and it was really, really neat to see how unique they were, that the themes were different every year. But then, wow, what a craft. And what I know, because the pictures were taken a long time ago without our high-tech digital cameras, that they don't do justice. And even the blurry pictures looked awesome. The ones that didn't have, the high def, it was still stunning to see. And it's interesting in the season how visually, Christmas comes alive in so many different ways.
Yeah, and now we have this nativity that's been kind of collected and made in the front, and I think that too is so powerful, just to have in the center of our worship space throughout this season this visual reminder of how God became one of us and came to be among us. You're right, art is powerful, and I'm grateful for the ways that we have incorporated more visual art into our life together, not only at Christmas, but even the gallery that Becky Ellsburn and others have helped rotate each few months. So we have pieces of art right when you come in the door, and it's a nice piece as a faith community to have.
Yeah, I've always been filled with a sense of peace when I go into the sanctuary. It's just, in fact, I sat up there when I first arrived, just sat up there. It's just incredible, and especially Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
I have my most distinct memories of Christmas Eve are about singing, interestingly enough. And whether it's I always think of Silent Night with the candles as being a really special moment at Wartburg. Whenever we did that, they would sing it in the different languages. And so I was a German guy, so I always got really excited when Stille Nacht, came on, and then I'd butcher my way through the Spanish and French versions as we got through those. But I've always appreciated the candle lighting. But my most distinct memory of Christmas Eve is my grandma singing. And grandma was one of those unapologetic church singers. Like, she just belted it out, and it didn't matter, who was around her. She just belted it out. But when O Come All Ye Faithful came up, she would always sing the Latin. And no one, of the other 300 or 500 people in the church, no one else was doing that, but grandma would, and she didn't care because she was going to praise Jesus in Latin during those different things. But in hindsight, I think in the moment I was probably a little embarrassed, but in hindsight, it was just this absolute unapologetic praise right? And I hear that as other people sing on Christmas Eve too, as they sing Joy to the World, as they sing these Christmas carols that we so often know by heart, that it's just unapologetic praise and joy singing. And that's fun to hear that, especially when the church is full. Also had a really interesting, when I was on internship, we did a late service, kind of like we do here. But that year it was the 100th anniversary of the Christmas truce. And so the worship director, did an entire service based around the Christmas truce. And they didn't have pews at this church, it was all chairs. And he literally made a no man's land. And the congregation had to sit and face each other as if we were the Germans and then the British and the French and the Americans. And there was all these dialogues and poems from the Christmas truce mixed in with the Christmas story. It was like a 2-hour service. So it was, I was exhausted I was almost falling asleep by the end, because, we'd had all these other ones leading up to it. But that sticks in my mind as similar to Pastor Dahl's story, is just this very different experience of Christmas Eve, of taking this Christmas story, putting it in a different context, and seeing how different things come alive when we do that. So I think it's fun to do something, have unique experiences at Christmas Eve, but I know I'm always looking forward to the nostalgic experience of seeing the Christmas carols that we know and doing that. So, but it sounds like there's going to be some great opportunities here at Trinity to do that, both on Christmas Eve and on Christmas Day. So folks have a lot of choices in terms of when they want to come to worship, and some different experiences to have there. I want to continue the conversation on a slightly different note. We hit a little bit on how visuals and Christmas, how we connect to the story through visuals. And if you were at the Christmas tea that was earlier this month, we had what I thought was a really interesting presentation by Helen Holder, who lives, I think, up in Minnesota, Austin, Minnesota, who has 900 nativity scenes. And Amy gives me grief sometimes because we have a dozen nativity scenes, but we're not even close. We got all kinds of collecting to do to catch up to 900. But I thought maybe we could chat a little bit this month too about maybe nativity scenes, and maybe if we had those growing up, what they looked like. But what I found especially interesting about Helen's presentation was the different things she described, because about her scenes, people would ask, which one was the biggest, which one was the smallest. But then she'd also talk about the symbolism. And what I took away from her presentation was these nativity scenes all tell the story in different way, with some different characters. Some are big, some are small, but all of them are pointing to Jesus coming into our world. So I thought maybe we could chat a little bit about nativity scenes growing up. Did you have a nativity scene? First of all, did you get to play with it, or was it look only? Because I think there's two kinds of nativity scenes in the world. But do you have memories, and did that ever teach you something about the story, as we think about not only Christmas carols and scripture readings, but also art informing our Christmas celebrations? What kind of nativity scenes did you have growing up, and what did they teach you about Jesus coming into the world?
Well, we had a very simple one, actually, and I was thinking about that word creche. In Portuguese, they use the word for nursery, and of course we use that here on occasion, creche. But if you look at the word, it just means crib. So the French, they just zero. And I guess in the ones that we've had, it's pretty much the crib. Jesus in the manger, Mary and Joseph, and not a whole lot of celebrities around. It was very simple. And I don't know if it kind of looks similar to the ones, that Helen was saying people got at Woolworth, and which was very popular in those days, and kind of begin to commercialize nativity scenes. And they begin to sell Mary in one bin. You could buy Mary or Joseph, or the wise men or shepherds and so on. But I guess we had to have a special place, and we knew where it was, but I guess we never really gave a whole lot of attention. It was there, and I never really added on to it growing up. I don't think anybody else did either. So I guess it's because my dad's mom, she didn't really have any of that kind of items. She kind of just stuck to the story.
Hmm.
I guess that's why it was so simple.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
We had a resin. It was like a hard plastic, but it wasn't plastic. It was like a resin, and it was all tan. It was all kind of a lighter brown color. The whole set was. The actual manger was a little bit darker. The figurines were all a little more tan. But what I remember about that set, and we could play with it, move it around, because apparently there was a story that at one stage when I was very young, kept putting the cow or the oxen in the middle of the scene because he had a gold ring in his nose, which really stood out on this set, and I thought he looked pretty cool. So I kept moving the baby Jesus side and putting the cow in the middle. And then that became a joke later on, but with my sisters. But what I remember about that set and what it portrayed about Jesus was it was a thoroughly Mediterranean looking set, from the way that the stable was formed to the fact it had a palm tree or a Mediterranean looking tree in it. And even the figurines themselves did not look European descent at all. They were definitely Mediterranean looking people. And I remember as a child that really reinforced for me that Jesus didn't look European. Jesus looked Mediterranean because he was born in Bethlehem, to a family from Nazareth and in Galilee. So that was probably my earliest recollection of thinking, oh yeah, this is the actual geographic location and ethnic root of who Jesus was as a human being. And so my parents still have that set. In fact, I just saw it here. We were back helping them decorate and saw that again, and that brought all that back. But probably still my favorite set. We have a bunch of them too, but I don't think any of them are quite as meaningful as that one is. We our girls, when they were young, they got a VeggieTales set, which has like the little cucumber that has a really high-pitched voice. He's the star angel, and you get a button on it. He sings like "Oh Holy Night" or "A Little Town of Bethlehem" or something. It's really super loud and high-pitched, and that's definitely a set to play with. But no, that one from my childhood is the one I think of the most when you ask that question.
It was always one of my favorite days of the year when we set up for Christmas. And my family has a lot of nativity scenes on different sides. And so it was an event to set up the nativity scenes. And I don't know if they got tired of doing it, but that always got to be my job growing up. So man, I looked forward to setting up the different scenes. But a couple of different things I remember at Grandpa and Grandma's house, their stable was a music box. And so you could twist the music box and it would play Silent Night. So it was always this very calming scene of Mary and Joseph and the different characters. And they were kind of plasticky, so they were very easy to play with. And so I can remember turning the music dial to add to the, which kind of created the mood to play out the story. But Grandpa and Grandma had an old set that I think came from their parents, or maybe they got when they were young adults. But I think it reminded me of the sets that Helen was talking about, because the pieces didn't match very well. And so my curiosity was that they bought a couple pieces here, a couple pieces there. But there was John the Baptist. It was a character, and I've never ever seen John the Baptist as a character in the Christmas story, because in the narrative he's a baby, right? But in this story, we always read the stories of John the Baptist in Advent. He's pointing to Jesus. Well, John the Baptist had his arm pointing out that Jesus was coming, but in his later years, John the Baptist's arm broke off in playing. And so, but Grandpa very faithfully glued John the Baptist's arm back on. So there's this like glob of super glue, holding John the Baptist's arm on. But he was always on the hutch. He wasn't quite next to it, but he was always there pointing to Jesus. And I always thought that was a unique character to have in the Christmas creche. But our tradition was that Mom got a new addition to a manger scene every year. That was our present to Mom. And so the first couple of years that got to be really easy. There was this set you could buy, and you'd get the main characters, Mary, Joseph, the stable. But after you're like 10, right now, you got some really unique characters gathering at the manger. There was a whole band of children playing musical instruments that probably weren't invented for about 400 more years in history. But man, they were playing the accordion and the flute and all these different things that they had. But what I loved about that set and what it taught me about the story is that the story is bigger than the moment that we just get in Luke chapter 2, right? It's the story of us coming to see Jesus revealed to us. And so we had some really unique animals that were hanging out in the stable that I don't know if would have been there when Jesus was born, but there was this sense of, as we set up the figurines, which at the end filled the whole table so that it was really standing room only to see Jesus, that it was really the sense of the whole world, the children with their instruments, the different animals, all creation gathering around the manger to see Jesus. So I think that's something really fun about manger scenes, is that there's so many unique pieces to them. Maybe they're super simple and just have the bare bones story of Mary, Joseph, and the baby. Maybe they have all kinds of other frills, but it's really a moment of us all gathering around baby Jesus come as a gift to us.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that's exactly it, right? I mean, beyond the particulars of who was there and what was there and historical accuracy and those kind of things, it's really, manger scenes are about putting us next to the manger. And that's one of the reasons there's such creativity around it. And I think about that too with the one that we have in the sanctuary. I mean, when you think about that, one of the beautiful things is because of the way that our decorators place it, it really puts us also, when we are in worship, at the manger scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in that room, that we are there to worship and to celebrate the birth of this child. So I think that's a great point you make, Pastor Daniel, about the point of it all, right? Is to bring us into the story. That's it.
As we had worship this past week for Holden Evening Prayer, I was admiring the manger scene as we were singing the prayers, and it was really interesting for me to see the cross as a part of the manger scene. Because it wasn't lit up. It was very much in the background, but it was almost a shadow. It was almost dark around that. And so looking past all of the manger scenes and the lights, that it was really moving. That was what I was reflecting on, but maybe that's something to check out as you come for worship. But I thought that was a really interesting way of placing the scene, that's where Jesus's future is.
Cool.
But yeah, maybe you have a cool story about manger scenes, or you have a super cool one that you want to take a picture of and post in the comments. I'm always interested to see more. That was one of my other favorite parts of Helen's presentation, was walking around the tables and seeing all the unique ones from around the world and the different expressions. But to wrap up today, I thought we could chat a little bit about giving in the season of Christmas. For a lot of folks, their way of celebrating Christmas is being really intentional about giving back, about being generous to others. And one really cool thing about me being here at Trinity is being, for the first time, is seeing all the ways that the congregation is so generous in all kinds of different ways all year, but especially at this time of year in this season. So maybe we could take a moment to share and celebrate a little bit of the generosity that's taken place here at Trinity. And Pastor Dan, maybe you could share about some of the things that have gone on in the past month and how that's been a blessing to others in the community.
Yeah, I think it's really good to celebrate. I think some of the generosity that's happened. I laughed, Dan Dahl, when you were reading the newsletter from the 80s, that there was an end of the year plea to throw offerings.
Life goes on in church.
some things never change, right?
Oh.
And that is a piece, I think, of this congregation's legacy, is incredible generosity, extraordinary generosity, right? We'd say our core value. But like we were just talking the other day about some of the ways that people have shown generosity just in the last 4 to 5 weeks, or even going back to the bazaar. We of course announced the bazaar proceeds this year were north of $19,000, way more than we've ever done before, and the large majority of those funds are going to be given away. When we gathered to carol and sing Christmas songs at Fat Hill a couple of weekends ago, $1,000 was given for ELCA World Hunger and Community Kitchen. And we were just there to share some good food, drink, and sing, and people were super generous in a really cool way. The angel trees that have been out, or the angel tree, I guess, that was in the entryway had gift tags for a couple different organizations, dozens and dozens and dozens of gift tags over the course of about a week and a half, and those are all gone. People took all of those and are buying gifts for children in our area. The Christmas tea involved an offering that was given away to some other people. The Nyack Choir, when they came and did a concert, there was an opportunity to support those youth as they are doing some music here later this spring. Bell ringing at Salvation Army, the Sunday school offering going to ELCA Global Barnyard, and even looking ahead to Christmas. Now we are going to return partially this year to what had been a long tradition at Trinity, which was giving away the holiday offerings, the offerings designated by our envelopes, our electronic giving to Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter. We're going to give half of our Christmas offering away to the St. Andrew's Refugee Services Program in Egypt. Pastor Christy Ministo was here over the summer telling us about this remarkable ministry in Egypt where refugees are doing ministry with and for refugees, because Cairo is this huge center of refugees coming from all over the world. It's really one of the greatest, most powerful programs in our ELCA Global Missions. And so we're going to support that. And then 43 North Iowa, which is another fantastic nonprofit in North Iowa that does work with housing security and workforce development for people in need. So just in the last 4 to 5, 6 weeks, all of this generosity has taken place through our congregation. I just think that is worth celebrating, and just what an appropriate way to celebrate Christmas, right? But then to think about, how do we care for our neighbor? How do we love our neighbor? And Trinity's people have been amazing, are amazing at that, and that's something we want to lift up.
Awesome. And if people want to read more about that in the annual report, do we write some of the stuff down? If folks are curious, where did all these offerings go out to? Where's a place that they can find that out?
Yeah. So we, a lot of these things will be lifted up in different ways through the connection each month. But yeah, at the annual meeting, we have a report that actually takes a couple of pages to try to break out different kinds of support, mission support that happens through Trinity, and it's always pretty surprising to see it all in a couple of pages, and just the ways that this congregation gives away to ministries beyond our walls, on top of all of the stuff. A massive amount of stuff that happens within our congregation is supported by time, talent, and treasure too. So yeah, that's a great place to look. In about a month and a half, we'll have that annual meeting. So
soon, and very soon.
Very soon.
But we have Christmas Eve before and then, so we'll look forward to celebrating that. Well, I'm out of coffee, so I think that's the cue that we might be out of time for this month. But thanks for joining us for the December Coffee with the Pastors. We pray that your Christmas Eve is a special and meaningful one. We hopefully look forward to seeing you at Trinity sometime soon. God's blessing. We'll talk to you next month.
Bye.